Welcome to the boat on the shore charcoal tutorial for today. This one I picked again because it's got wonderful textures in it. The boat's got these wonderful textures in it, and then we've also got the lovely sandy beach, etc. But you'll notice that when I did my sketch as well, so when I did tell you guys to do your sketch, I said just sketch out the boat basically, because we want to try and keep this background quite soft. Okay, so I don't want any of these hard sort of lines in here, because as soon as you do any sort of tracing, so I've done a tracing, I haven't sketched it out freehand. It's just quicker for me, especially with the lessons. I don't really have time to sit and do it freehand. So I do the tracing, but then I don't trace out the background as well, because then what happens is I end up with this very hard line here, which then I can't get rid of. And if you look at this background, it's all very nice and soft. We want to try and keep the texture with the boat. Okay. If you have, for some reason, sketched out the background, don't stress too much. All I can suggest is that you try and erase as much of that as you can. Okay. All right. So with this particular one, we're going to be starting off with the charcoal dust. Okay. So if you look at this background, you have a choice here. You can either put in a very subtle sort of grey background, all right, so that when you pull your tape off, you've got a nice little edge to it, all right. Or you can just leave it plain. You don't have to put the background in. You can maybe just leave it white, and then you just have your foreground and a bit of background in there as well. You can just leave that white. But I think for me it would be quite nice to be able to put a little bit of just a very, very subtle grey background in. And I'll put that in first, so that when we put the boat over it, so what happens is once you've put if you try and put the boat in first, and then you try and put your background in, what happens is it's very difficult to get the background nice and smooth, and especially where it joins up with the boat, and then you end up with this sort of funny halo, especially with the charcoal. Okay, so make sure that your edges of your tape are down nicely like that. You can use the paintbrush. I do prefer to use this little, what I call like a dusting ball. So it's just a bit of cotton wool wrapped up in an old t-shirt. Okay. And then we just use that to put the charcoal dust onto the paper. All right, so I'm going to grab some of this charcoal dust quickly. Should actually have a spoon. But anyway, it's fine. I'm just going to do this. Oh my goodness. Okay, well, there we go. That came out quite a bit faster than I expected. Oh, my word. Okay, so if you've only got the paintbrush, then you just pick up your charcoal dust with your paintbrush, tap it, give it a good sort of tap, and then you can start putting that on very softly, because we don't want this too dark. Okay. What I would suggest you do is barely touch the paper with your paintbrush and just start rubbing the charcoal on there. Okay, so that's with the charcoal, with the paintbrush. I'm going to be using the ball. Okay, so I'm going to pick up some of this charcoal dust. So remember, we want this quite light. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick up with the ball, and I'm going to give it a good sort of tap with my fingers. I don't want it too dark. If you want to, you can test it first, and then just test it on your paper to see how dark it's going to go before you go on. So you might need to, okay, so this charcoal dust is very fine. So I can see it actually goes dark quite quickly. So I'm actually going to wipe some of it off onto my paper before I even go onto my page. All right, so you must always test it before you go on. Okay, and then I'm going to just start giving myself a bit of a background. Remember to go over the edges of your boat, so that you don't have to go back into it again, because remember, you're going to erase afterwards as well. So just make sure you go over onto the boat drawing. And if you find it's gone too dark, remember, you can just go back over it. You can grab a tissue if you want to. You can just rub it with a tissue. So say it's gone too dark, you can either use another ball, a clean ball, or you can just take a clean tissue, and using the same sort of feeling, you can just take some of it off. Okay, all right, so if you feel it's gone a little bit dark, but I mean, that's actually fine. Just remember, if you have got any cream or anything on your hands, rather go and wash your hands quickly, because what happens is if you touch this paper now and you go and put charcoal dust on it, it's going to leave some weird sort of marks. Okay, it's going to pick up the cream on your fingers. Okay, so just make sure your hands are quite clean. Also work on a board or something. So you'll see I've got a board underneath here, or you can just get a few sheets of newspaper. That also works very well. It's just that you want a relatively smooth surface to work on. If you're working on a table or something that's got any little bumps or anything on it, then you're going to have a problem getting this nice smooth transition. Okay, but the tissue also works very well. You can also take a tissue. If you don't want to use the paintbrush, you can literally just take a tissue, fold it sort of relatively flattish, do the same thing, pick up some of the charcoal dust and then just rub it on. Just try not to get too much because we don't want to make this too dark. Okay, so you can just get just bring it down to roughly where your picture starts there. Just make sure you don't have any marks on your paper already. So there's a little mark there. So I can see this paper is, actually this is a different paper to the one I normally use, but I can see it has got 1 or 2 dents in it, but it's fine. Unfortunately you can only see that once you start doing this charcoal thing. The one advantage, of course, working with a willow charcoal, because it doesn't have any additives in it, is if you decide you don't want this anymore, you can actually erase most of it. All right, just using a needle eraser. Okay, so I'm going to just bring it down to about there. That's fine. Okay. I almost have a feeling that I have a little bit of cream on here somewhere. Okay, so if there are any darker spots that you don't want, just grab your needle eraser and just erase what you don't want there. Remember, you mustn't use a hard eraser because the needle eraser is the one that gives a softer line when you're erasing. So it's just getting outside those marks there, that's fine. Just remember, you guys must just have another piece of paper on the side that you can lean on. Just if you are going to be leaning on your picture at any stage, then at least you can just grab that piece of paper and you can just lean on it. All right, just so go grab a piece of fax paper if you don't have already, and you're going to use that to lean on. Okay. Right. Okay, so now we're going to start with the boat. So the printout that I made is a lot lighter because I wanted to get some of that detail there. Okay, to see what was going on over there. This one is a little bit darker, but where's the original? So when I look at my phone and I actually look at the reference on the phone, you'll see it is a lot darker there. So I quite liked the tonality of that, you know. But I found then I just couldn't see enough of what was actually going on there. But I do quite like those tonalities. But you can judge yourself whether you want to make it slightly darker as it is in the actual reference itself, or if you want to keep it lighter. So I quite like the fact that there's quite a big difference between the white of the ship itself here and then the side of the ship. And again, you can see in this one, you can actually see more of a gray background. Okay, so the white actually really pops out from the background. It's what we're actually looking for. All right, so that's why you do need a little bit of a gray background. I could have actually made this slightly darker if I wanted to, just to show it up a little bit more. So I think I'm going to make it a fraction darker there. So this is where you've got to be very careful when you've got your reference and you've got your printout as well. Make sure you've got the right thing. So I'm going to make it a fraction darker here because I want that white to pop quite nicely there. So I'm going to make it a little bit darker there. So just check to see if it's dark enough that you're going to be able to see the white standing out against it there. Remember, we're going to just erase that white there. Okay, so I'm going to make this a little bit darker. Not the whole area, just sort of mostly where I see where I want that white to pop. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to make it a little bit darker, just roughly around this area over there. And then that's actually cool. Yeah, that's actually better. I think I prefer that. That's going to work quite well. Right. Okay, so you can either work off your phone or your iPad or your computer if you prefer to work off that to get the tonalities right. So I'm going to be working off my phone to get those initial tonalities correct, and then I'll use the lighter one that I actually printed out just to get the finer sort of details in the darker area over here. Okay, right, so I'm going to start off with a charcoal pencil. So the thing with your charcoal pencil, remember, this is not something that you can erase easily. The Willow charcoal is very easy to erase, okay, but the charcoal pencil itself is a little bit more difficult because it's got the gum arabic in it. So if you are going to put it on, you must just make sure that whatever it is you're going to be putting on, you don't want to take off, okay, so you can't afford to make any mistakes or anything like that. So usually what we would do is we would usually start off with the Willow charcoal, and then we would go back in with the charcoal pencil afterwards and bring in the finer details. But because this is quite a definitive sort of shape, etc., and there are very distinctive sort of dark marks on here, I'm going to bring in a few of those dark marks just to bring those out already, and then I'm going to work with the Willow charcoal into that. Okay, so these marks are quite sort of fine. It depends on what size you are working on. If you're all working on A3, that's fine. If you're working on A4, obviously you're going to be working with even smaller areas, so you must make sure you have got a very, very fine, sharp point. So just make sure that you just sharpen up your pencil so that it's very nice and sharp. It doesn't really matter what one you're using, so soft, hard, medium, as long as it does give you a nice sharp point. This one I'm using is a medium, so it's not a very soft one. So there I've got a nice sharp point, and I'm just going to start off at the top. So with the charcoal, we try and start off an area sort of either to the left or top down, or from left to right, so that you're not leaning on it too much. All right, so I'm going to start off at the top here. If you are going to be leaning on an area you don't want to lean on, remember just to grab a piece of paper, and then you can just put it down there so that you're not leaning on there inadvertently. Okay, because remember the Willow charcoal is going to come off quite easily. So I'm just going to start bringing in these dark marks now initially. Just the dark marks that you see. Don't bring any other marks, only the dark marks. So don't do any unnecessary marks if they're not there. Okay, so you can start bringing that in there. Not the grey areas, only the black areas. Alright, so don't bring any of those grey areas. That we're going to use the Willow charcoal for. So just the black areas that you see, all those little black marks, you can just bring those in. When you do lift up your paper, just remember to, when you put your paper down, put it down. When you lift your paper up, don't drag it off the paper, off your page, because you're going to drag your charcoal with it. All right, so just remember to pick it up and then actually put it down in one sort of go, if that makes sense. Okay, so I'm just going to get those in there. So wherever it is not black, so you can see the top of this boat over here, it's not black, so I'm not going to use this black pencil for that. I'm only going to bring the black in where the black is. I'm going to be using the blending stump and the Willow charcoal to bring in those darker grey areas. Okay, so don't do any of the greys with the black, please. Just do the black areas there. I'm only going to just do this top section, so we're not doing the whole picture. Just going to do this top section for the moment. Remember, you don't have to copy it exactly the same. You can move some of the marks where you want them to be. You know, you don't have to make an absolute photographic representation. This is just a reference. Okay. You don't have to bring in as much detail as I do, so I am a bit of a detailed person. I do tend to bring in a fair amount of detail into my drawings. So if you prefer to make it a little bit looser, a little bit sketchier, then you don't have to be quite so fussy, all right, when it comes to that sort of thing. So here we go. So I'm going to bring in those darks. What I find helps is to squint my eyes. I just check to see, have I brought in all the blacks that I want to bring in into that piece there. See if I've missed any. And remember, you can bring some of these blacks back in again afterwards as well, you know, after the fact, so you don't have to. If you've missed one or two, or you decide you want to leave some out, you can do that too. Okay. Alright, so that's it. I'm just going to do that with the black pencil. Right, so now I'm going to use the blending stump. Try and find one that has got a nice sort of sharpish point. You know, not the one that's been used too much and it hasn't got a nice sharp point. If you want to, you can even just pick up a new one as well, because it's got a nice sharp edge to it. Okay. Then you're going to grab your willow charcoal, a piece of willow charcoal, and you're going to be rubbing your pencil, your blending stump, your blending pencil, whatever you want to call it. I'm going to rub that onto the charcoal like that. Okay. And then I'm going to test it on my paper next to me to see how dark it is. Okay, so just to make sure you know how dark it is. And I'm going to bring in that top little grey sort of piece at the top there. So I'm just going to sketch that in there with the actual blending stump. Just that part. The rest I'm going to do with charcoal dust. Okay, so I'm just going to sketch that in, and then the side piece over here as well, I'm going to sketch in as well. What you can do there, if you want to, you can take some of your willow charcoal, sketch that in with the willow charcoal, and then go over it with a blending stump. So if it's not going dark enough, then just do it like that instead. So that is preferable there, to actually go into it with the willow charcoal first. Just put some willow charcoal on there, and then just blend it in with a blending stump a bit. You don't have to, if it goes on directly and you find you don't need the blending stump, then you can just leave it as it is. Okay, so just that grey bit over there. Okay, so I just wanted to get this nice grey line. That's why I didn't want that black line there. But I can't do this directly with the charcoal itself because it's going to smudge. It's not going to make a nice sharp line. I'm looking for that nice sort of sharp line over there at the top. So that's why I use the blending stump for that. Okay, and now I'm going to be using the charcoal dust again. Alright, so here we're going to use our paintbrush and the charcoal dust. And we're going to be putting that down onto this whole area. And you can be putting it on quite dark. You can see how dark I'm putting it on. Just remember to blow every now and again, just to get it off. And you can see with this boat, it's sort of darker to the left-hand side, and then it becomes a little bit lighter. But, oopsie. So be careful when you pick up your charcoal dust, like what happened now with me. You can see there it's suddenly almost like splashed. Okay, so I'm not used to working. This charcoal dust is very fine. There we go. And then you just take a little ball and you can just put it on there. So just be very careful when you do go over. So you can go over this whole area. We're going to use the hard eraser to erase the whites back into this again. Okay, so you can just cover this whole area with the dark, because I want to get all those dark bits over there, and then I'll erase into that to get the texture. You can see I am also following the direction of the wood as well. I'm not going side to side. I'm actually going up and down. Alright, so I am using the texture of the paintbrush as well to sort of help already get some of that woody sort of texture in there. So if I drag it down, you can actually see I'm almost getting those sort of lines already. which can give you an idea of the wood. Just get this thing to stop. Every time I blow, it disappears onto my thing here. Okay, so just get some of that nice and dark. You can put a fair amount on. There we go. You can squint your eyes to check to see if it's gone dark enough for your liking. So it's not pitch black, you know, but it's just nice. It's a nice dark grey. Okay, there we go. That's enough for me. So once you've got that area in there, what we're going to do now is we're going to be using a hard eraser. So I normally use one of those Faber-Castell erasers because they're particularly hard. But any other hard eraser will also actually work quite nicely, as long as it's relatively firm. It mustn't be too flexible. All right, so this one's not really flexible. And I'm going to cut a piece off there so that I've got a nice sharp edge to work from, and I can scratch this in. Your other alternative is to use an eraser pencil. So if you've got an eraser pencil, you can also just sharpen that to a nice sharp edge. This one doesn't really give a very sharp edge. It is nice to work with, but it's, in that sense, it doesn't give me the very sharp edges that I'm looking for here, so I don't use that. And then you can also buy the eraser pencils as well, that give you a nice sharp ones. Ones of different sizes, and you also get one of these as well. This is like one of these push erasers, but there again you can see it's quite flexible. You can cut it to get a nice sharp edge, but it's not as sharp as this hard eraser that I'm going to be using. So it will give you a sharpish edge, but you have to experiment with the different erasers. It depends on which one you've got. So some erasers are going to be harder than others. Some are going to work better. So it's always good to just to test your eraser. So I'm going to cut a piece here, just so I've got a nice sharp edge, just like that. And I'm going to use that, and I'm going to drag that into my charcoal here, dust that I have put down. And I'm going to bring in some of those nice little textures. Okay, so you can dab, you can drag, and you can see it immediately starts giving you some of that nice woody texture. And I'm putting more white to the right hand side because you can see there is a little bit lighter to the right there, and then not so much. There isn't really much in the actual left hand side there, so I'm not going to bring any whites in there. I'd rather go back into that and bring in a little bit of dark textures there with a charcoal pencil. You don't have to copy it exactly, as long as you get the same sort of similar idea. You can use your own initiative here. And remember, if you've taken off too much, you can just go back in again, and you can either just put it on some with your wooled charcoal itself, or with a charcoal dust again. Okay, and then you'll find you might need to, you know, just keep on chopping and changing your edges as well, because they do get a little bit blunt every now and again. So you might have to cut another piece just now. Okay. Squint your eyes, check to see if it is looking roughly the same sort of tonalities as that side. Like so. And then what I'll do is I'll go back into the left hand side where it's got a little bit of those rougher sort of textures. I'm just going to use the willow charcoal for that. You can also use a charcoal pencil if you want to, and then you can bring in some of those little darker sort of textures that you can do, as I said, with either with the willow charcoal on its own. You can just get some of those little rough little bits there, bring a little bit of texture into here. Just makes it very interesting. It's got a very interesting surface. That's why I like this boat, because it's not just a new sort of paint or anything that's been freshly painted, because then it wouldn't really have much character, you know. I like all these little dark bits and etc. And then I'm just going to bring those shadows over there. Those little, I don't know what those things are called. I don't know anything about boats at all. So whatever those are over there, sticking out there. I think it's almost like, it almost looks like something that they would use for a fishing rod. That would stand out there and they would actually maybe hang the fishing rod on there or something. So just to get the shadows there. Because remember, your shadows are also very important here because it's what gives your picture perspective and a 3D-ness. Okay, so we'll make it a little bit 3D. Okay, so bring in whatever you want to into this. And just leave it just like that if you want to. Just make sure that you've got the nice tonalities there. For me, that's the most important thing. So make sure the blacks are black enough. Make sure the greys are grey enough. And make sure the white is white enough. Okay, because you don't want just black and white. You want to have those nice tonalities. So I want to go a little bit darker on this side here. I'm going to go in with the pencil and bring that in. So Marianne, you'll see I'll usually be a little bit ahead of you guys. Also depends on what sort of technique you're working with. You know, if you're working a little bit rougher or whatever, you may be. Right. Okay. Okay, so I'm quite happy with that. I'm going to bring in one or two little darker areas over here. Little shadows there. A little bit of definition. Okay. What's nice about the charcoal pencil is it's got its own sort of texture when you do put it on top of your paper, you know, compared to the willow charcoal. So if you're looking for some rougher sort of textures, then it actually is going to put it in for you, which is quite nice. So, and also you've got a bit more control with it because it's got a little point, you know. So I'm going to use that to bring in some of the rougher textures into that. And remember to, if you can, stand up and look at your picture as well occasionally, to check to see that you're sort of getting the right feel, because often when you're sitting right on top of it like we are at the moment, you sort of get lost in the details, and sometimes you don't need to bring in quite so much. Okay, right, just going to squint, check that out. Remember, you can go back into it a little bit as well if you want to make it darker in some areas. You can use your paintbrush as well, again, on top. Okay, so I've done that little top piece there. Now I'm going to be working with this back section of the boat, not at the bottom, but this little back little cabin part, because I want to work from left to right again. And you're going to do exactly the same thing as you did with that piece over there. But what you'll notice is there's no white in that area at all. Okay, so you're going to be covering that completely with the willow charcoal to get that tonality correct, and you'll be keeping the white area for this front piece of the boat. Okay, so again I'm going to take the charcoal pencil and I'm going to bring in the black areas that I see there that I want. Okay, so just the black areas. Remember, any whites that you want, you must leave them white because you're not going to be able to erase them again, okay? It's very important to remember that on your charcoal. It's a bit like painting with watercolor, you know, you've got to leave the whites where you want them white. you can go right around to the actual windows themselves as well. There's front windows, so you can bring all those black areas in because you're working left to right and sort of down as well. So you're not going to be leaning on that area again anyway. So there you can bring in your black areas again as well. I'm just bringing the black areas. You'll notice I'm not really sketching out anything else really, just the sort of black areas that I see. Maybe you might need to sharpen your pencil every now and again. So with this particular one as well, because it's got so many different sort of angles, etc., but they are very specific angles. It's very important that your drawing is actually correct here, because if you have anything that's slightly skew, you're going to notice it immediately. You know, your eye is very good at picking up those things that are perspective is incorrect. You know, it's not quite the right angle, or the window is not going at the right angle compared to the roof, etc. as well. Your eye will immediately pick it up. So just make sure that all of your little windows, etc., are correct. Okay, let's see any other little black bits that I can see there. Remember, you can soften the black bits very slightly if you need to. You know, if you've put the charcoal down, you can actually go into it with the blending stamp and sort of blend it a little bit into your page. If you don't want it quite so rough, you know, if you prefer to have it a little bit more detailed. So now we've got those sort of like nice little dark patches in there, and now we're going to just pick up the willow charcoal dust with the I always want to call this a pencil. We're going to pick up the willow charcoal dust with the paintbrush, okay, and we're going to bring in those darkish greys over there, because it looks white, but it's not actually white because it's in shadow. All right, so we're going to bring those in there, and what we're going to do here is we're going to actually get the grey down, and then we're going to bring in the darker patches on top of that. So here we're not going to be erasing because there isn't any white here, okay. So you'll see I did go over that white area over there, but that I can erase now with the eraser because it's actually a very small area. I don't want to try and work around it. It's a bit of a mission. So I'd rather just go over it now with this and then go back into it with the eraser for those little white little pieces there. So I'm just going to go up to where the boat the boat edge comes up there. Again, I'm also working in the same direction as the wood. I'm not going in a different direction. I'm not going side to side because your eye will pick up that you actually put the charcoal dust on side to side. It just does. It's just quite a sensitive thing, an artist's eye especially. Even a non-artist's eye would actually pick it up as well. So yeah. Okay, so I'm just going to go up to that area there for the moment. So I want to get that nice grey area in there. Okay, and then around the top over there. So if your paintbrush is a little bit big, you can just use the blending stump to bring in this grey area at the top here, if you prefer. Sometimes it's easier to do that. Okay, so I'm just going to do that area and then I'm going to work into this area first and then I'll move on to that front section of the boat. Okay, so I'm going to now just erase those little white pieces there that I want to bring back. A little white showing through there with the hard eraser. And that little shadow over there, a little highlight over there. So what's nice about this is you can see now you can control how white you want to make it just by how hard you press with the eraser. Because that is not as white as the white of the rest of the windows and that there. Now I've got those grey areas that looks about the right tonality to me. And then I'm going to now use my charcoal, willow charcoal stick. And I'm going to bring in those little darker little shadows over there. Not shadows, those darker marks on the side of the boat. And then use my blending stump to sort of fine tune them a little bit there. So there, what I've done is now I've sort of gone into that one window because that one window is quite dark over there. So I've brought that in there as well. And then if you find you need to lighten an area, so say for instance now, if I look at that window, and for me it's a little bit too dark in comparison, well, the side of the boat is a little bit darker than I would like it to be in comparison to the window. So it doesn't really stand out quite enough. Okay, that's just for me. What you can do is you take a needle eraser for this. Okay, so not your hard eraser because you don't want to make it white. So you don't want to bring any whites in there. You just want to get rid of some of the charcoal dust. The other thing you can do is take a clean blending stump and try and take some of it off, but then obviously it has to have no charcoal on it. Okay. Otherwise, you just take your needle eraser and you very, very gently you can just drag it over the area that you want slightly lighter. So I'm just going to make that area a little bit lighter. And remember, you can go back into it again with the paintbrush as well, just to sort of blend it back in again if you want to. But I just want this to be a little bit lighter. It's not quite so dark as the very left hand side of the boat, because you know obviously this is starting to go into the lighter side of the boat, so it's not quite as dark. That's a bit better. That window is actually standing out a little bit better now. So it's not white, it's just a bit lighter. Alright, so then you can go back into it and you can just fine tune. So I'm just looking to make sure that I've got the right tonalities. I know that word is going to start driving you nuts just now, but it's very important, especially in this particular one, that you've got the right tonalities here. Okay, because otherwise it's going to look very flat. Right. Okay, and you can bring again your pencil if you want to. If you want to bring in slightly rougher textures, you can just use your pencil to bring that in. So this paper that I've used this time is not quite as smooth as the last paper that I used. It's got a slight more texture to it, but I thought I'd try something different for a change, because the last paper was very, very smooth, and I actually almost wanted to bring a little bit more texture into this particular drawing. So your paper that you pick as well is also going to determine how your drawing is going to come out. So it is a relatively smooth paper that I've got here, but if you've got the slightly rougher, more like a pastel paper or something like that, then you're obviously not going to get quite as smooth as finishes I've got here. All right, so just be aware of that. You know, don't stress too much if it's not coming out as smooth as mine. Bring in that little crack over there because that makes it look very cool. There we go. So you'll learn eventually what tools work the best for the different sort of textures that you're looking for. Whether you're going to use a pencil, you're going to use the blending stump, or you're going to be using the paintbrush. Okay. Okay, so I'm quite happy with that little piece over there. I'm going to go into the windows now. And I'm just going to bring in the different grays that I see and leave the whites where I want to see the whites. Okay, so that's basically all I'm going to be doing now. You can, if you want to have a little bit more control, you can rather just use the blending stump and just rub some charcoal onto the blending stump if you want slightly more control. Okay, otherwise you can just go in with the charcoal stick itself and then either erase or or blend into it. Okay, so I just like a little bit more control here. So I'm going to just use the blending stump with a bit of the charcoal. Every now and again I'm going to just put the charcoal down as well and just use a blending stump to put in there. So you just have to play around and see what works for you the best there. But especially with this little slightly finicky part here, which is, with the windows, I prefer to rather use the blending stump just to get a bit more control there. So here, where we've got these windows over here, if you are bringing in these little grey bits and the little white bits, just make sure you do it accurately. Okay, so rather take your time with this section over here because it's quite a nice area of the ship, okay, or the boat. So try and get that nice and correctly, get the tonalities correct, because those little highlights that pop out every now and again, and then the greys also have their place in it, and then the blacks also have their place in it as well. It makes it really stand out nicely, and I'm looking for that in this particular picture. It's quite a significant area of the boat. Okay, so don't rush this area, rather take your time with this piece here, and rather look to see what it is you're busy drawing. So don't just draw, rather look to see what you're actually busy doing. Okay, because it's very easy to make a mistake here. You can just suddenly not look at the right window and put the wrong shadow in the wrong place. It's very easy to do that. You can see, if you look at mine quickly now, can you see how that's working very well? This little piece over here, we have got the highlights in the right place, I've got the shadows in the right place, and the black areas in the right place as well. And you can see it immediately makes it look sort of 3D. Okay. Even if you're doing your picture in a loose way, it doesn't mean that you mustn't get all those grey areas, tonalities, and that in the right place. Okay, so you can still do it without being too perfectionistic about it, but they must be in the right place. Okay. So now with that, I've sort of done my windows basically, but now I'm just looking at the different tonalities there just to make sure that I've got it. So I keep on squinting my eyes just to make sure I've got all the darks in the right places. I have finished it off. I'd rather spend a little bit of extra time on these windows just to make them really work for me. I think that's actually fine. I'm going to just stand up and look at that and make sure I've got that correct. Yeah. Yeah, I think I'm actually quite happy with that. It could probably go a little bit darker underneath there, but I can always bring that black in. Actually, I'm going to do that now quickly. So. You know, and at the end of your drawing, you can always leave it. You know, I always tend to leave it for a day, you know, or a few hours at least before I spray it, just to make sure that there isn't something that suddenly bothers me. Because sometimes you'll walk past and go, "Oh my word, what the heck did I do there?" You know. So, because you can get very caught up in the finer details, and then you don't really see the bigger picture sometimes, or you see something that's a bit out. So yeah, I'm going to make this slightly lighter over here. Oops. Is any problem with working on a angled surface? Okay, that's a bit better. Okay. And remember, you can also make an area darker if you want to. Say you've sprayed it and you want to work on it again and make some area darker, then you can spray it and then go over it again. Okay, so that does help a lot as well. Right. Okay. Okay, all right. Well, I think we may as well finish off this little piece over here, so this little whole cabin side. So this grey area here, so I want to make it a little bit grey because I want the white of this boat to stand out there. So I'm going to make that a little bit greyer, and I'm just going to rather use the paintbrush here because I've got a bit more control, and I just want to make that section behind the reflection darker. So it mustn't be just a sudden dark blob in compared to the rest of your picture. You know, you must make sure it does sort of blend in at least. But here I can control it a bit. So I'm going to just do that just to make it a little bit darker, just in that particular corner there. So when I take the eraser now and I erase that line in there, it's going to be nice and white. Can you see what I've done there? So I just want you to check out there quickly. Can you see how that now stands out against the background? And I want that contrast over there. Okay, so with regards to this part, this front part of the ship, you have two ways of doing this. You can either go into it with the charcoal dust and then erase the white bits into it, or your other route is to take your charcoal pencil. So you take your blending stump and use your charcoal willow charcoal stick, and actually then sketch those into there. So you can do it either way. You can do it this way, like that, and then bring in these little bits. So you're basically drawing the dark parts in. Or you can put the dark part in and then erase the white parts out. So there's two ways of doing it. You don't have to do it one or the other. Either way is fine. Okay, so I think I'm going to do it this way. It works quite nicely. Gives me a nice texture. You know, you sort of almost got a bit more control when you do it this way as well. So. Now I can bring in some of these little darker patches over here. So I'm just going to frittle here. Nice Afrikaans word, that, frittle. To get some of these textures in here. The peeling paint. Obviously you can bring more texture in if you want to. You want to make it more textured, you can do that too. And what you can see now I'm also doing is where I want slightly darker areas, I'm actually just going directly in with the charcoal willow stick itself, and not the charcoal pencil, just the willow charcoal, because I don't want it to be very black, and just scratching in there and then going in with the blending stump and actually bringing in some textures. That's working very, very well. So I'm actually very happy with that sort of texture. That feel over there is actually looking very nice. I really like that. That's actually looking very cool. Yeah, no, I'm very happy with that. Remember to bring it down, always, obviously bring it down all the way to the edge of your boat here, because when you bring your boat on top of that, you know, you don't want this to sort of stop over there. It must go all the way down to where it goes behind the boat, you know, where it disappears behind the boat there. So don't just stop at your lines randomly, you know, just above that line. Okay. There we go. That's actually looking very cool. I'm just going to squint, check to see if it needs to maybe go dark or lighter in areas. So just check patches there. So here I want to make this a fraction darker. So this area where it disappears into the shadows, I'm going to make it a little bit darker. So I'm just going to use my charcoal dust for that. So I'm just bringing a fraction more texture into this other piece over here. There we go. That's actually it. I mustn't overwork it. And just that grey bit there. That's all I need to bring in there. The shadows are darker here. Okay, so I'm going to leave that just like it is at the moment. We're going to have our break now. Okay, so as I said, that for me was, that's probably the most detailed part of the area. the actual drawing, and it needed quite a fair amount of control, okay, because it's got quite a lot of lights and darks in it. This is a lot more, just more darks, and then of course you've got the writing in. So what I've done there is, you'll see I actually did trace out the writing because I wasn't going to try and do that freehand. I just thought that's just make my life a lot easier. Of course, you don't have to have a name in there. You can just have nothing. It doesn't actually have to have a name. All right. But when you look at this this part of it, the hull itself, the tonality is quite a fair amount darker than anywhere else. So you can see there, I would say the front part of the ship is about the same as that, but the rest is relatively dark. Okay. So I'm not going to use charcoal dust with this one this time round. I'm going to go in with the willow charcoal, and then I'm going to use the paintbrush in certain areas. I'm going to use a blending stump in certain areas, and then the eraser in certain areas. Okay, but I want it to be, as I said, a bit darker. There are lighter areas in it as well. That's why I'm not going to use the pencil itself. But what I would suggest we do is exactly the same as we did with that part of the boat, is go in with the pencil itself, the charcoal pencil, and bring in the blacks that you want. So if you want to put the writing in now, you can put the writing in now, etc. So I just want you to put all the dark areas in, the black areas that you see. Put those in the meantime, okay, before we go into the rest of it. So just remember, you must only do the blacks that you want, all right? So don't put any other areas black that aren't black. So this very dark area at the bottom over here, remember you're going to be bringing in your grass here. Okay, so this particular section here. All right, so let me just get the picture. So I want you to all look up over here. So this particular area over here, where the grass joins up with the black area, don't do that with this charcoal pencil, because I want you to be able to erase into that black, and you're not going to be able to do it with the charcoal pencil. So just all the other black parts you can bring in, but where you've got that area there, I want you just to use the willow charcoal as the black. Okay, all right, so just that section over there, you must use the willow charcoal for the black. So here I'm actually going to be using this as a reference, because I can see a bit better what areas where it stops, the black areas. We'll go back into it afterwards, once we've done the grass bits, then we can go back into it afterwards and make it blacker in certain areas. But for the moment, I just want you to make that area black with the willow charcoal. What's nice is here you can bring in one or two of these lines of the wood that goes through, because you want to obviously follow the same shape. So you must make sure you can actually use your charcoal pencil to bring in some of those little bits there. Make sure when you do the writing that your pencil is nice and sharp. Remember, the writing isn't like 100% black, because remember, it's also old, you know, it's also taken its toll, you know, the weather's also taking the toll on the writing. So don't go and make the writing absolutely pitch black. It's going to look very strange in comparison to the rest of your boat. Okay, so you can see it's sort of faded in certain areas and dark in certain areas. Bringing all the nice little black bits that I see, and I'm actually putting 1 or 2 extra ones in, just so sort of I can get the impression of the wood as it goes along and it follows the shape of the boat. Just remember, if you're leaning on a part of your drawing, just make sure you do put something down there. Just remember where it joins up with the grass, just with a charcoal. We'll go back into that, you'll see, because the charcoal itself is a totally different feel to the charcoal pencil. It's going to look very strange when you put it down against the charcoal pencil, but don't stress about that now. It's just that where we want joining up with the grass, then we want to make sure that we can actually get that grassy effect in there. Okay, we'll do the whole of the ship first before we go into the grassy bits there. So just make sure you've got all the dark bits that you want in here first before we go into the hull. And bring in those greys and that. So any dark bits you see that you want in there, just get those in now. Remember, you can bring some of them, a few extra ones in afterwards if you want to. I just want to get these main sort of bits in here, you know, where the hole is, and not the hull, the actual hole in the ship, the side of the ship. Bring those in there. Just the main dark bits that I can see. Okay. Okay, so if I look at this reference over here, there's not that much tonality difference between the hull itself and this area over here. But in the actual printout or the actual photograph itself, when I emailed to you guys, if you haven't got that, if you look at this here, you can actually see there's a fair difference between the two. This is really dark. You know, if you actually squint your eyes, you can see how dark that is in comparison to the rest of it. There are some areas that are similar, but that will use the needle eraser to bring out. Okay, so I'm just going to bring in 1 or 2 extra sort of lines here with this, because it won't disappear once I've actually used the charcoal on top of it. So that's why I like to use this charcoal pencil, just to bring in some of the little bits there. So now what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start going into this hole now, and I'm going to go in with the actual charcoal, willow charcoal itself. All right. So I'm going to go and bring it in. I know it's going to look quite dark, but I want it to be quite dark. But you'll see now that your charcoal drawing underneath there that you did with the charcoal pencil is going to actually stay behind. And you'll be able to see where you put those darks in. Okay. And you must judge where you can press harder, where you want it darker, then press dark, obviously. You know what I mean? So don't just go and make it all dark. I want you to sort of follow the reference to a point, obviously. So like this dark piece at the top here is quite dark, so you can go into that dark. And then, you know, as you go further down, then you can go lighter, etc. So just make the darker, lighter areas where you feel they need to be. And remember, when you're doing this, follow the same contours of the hull itself. All right, so don't work down like this, so don't work vertically. You must work horizontally and just follow the same shape of the ship itself, or the boat. All right, so you can see there, I'm just sort of going into it, and you can see how you can really see how the black differs in comparison to the blackness of the charcoal itself, the willow charcoal itself. Also, some of your willow charcoal will be blacker than mine, so some does come out very black, some of it comes up more grey. Okay, but your willow charcoal generally is more grey than black. Okay, then I'm going to start playing around with my paintbrush and the blending stump and the erasers to get the feeling that I want. Okay, so I'm going to start blending some of this in and getting some of that texture that I'm looking for there. Also following the contours of the ship. Okay, so don't go against it. Don't go make the lines going down, because that's just not going to work. It's going to look very strange. And you can just keep on blowing. And then where I want it to be lighter, I'll go in with the eraser, the needle eraser. you'll see this front part of the ship. Okay, so the front part of the hull, the wood itself has got a different grain. That grain actually goes down if you look at it carefully. It doesn't go so it goes vertically, it doesn't go horizontally like the rest. So when you do this part here, make sure that you actually do draw it also going down vertically compared to the other one. And then when you're using the paintbrush, or if you're going to just use the blending stuff, also just use a vertical motion, okay, because that's important. It does actually make a difference. What's nice is you'll see, like if you use the tip of your paintbrush, depending on what sort of paintbrush you're using, you can actually get almost like scratchy marks in here, which is quite nice. And then I'm going to use the needle wool eraser to get in these other marks here, because remember, I don't want to make it white. I just want to make it a little bit lighter in certain areas. So if I use the hard eraser, it's just immediately going to make it white, which I don't want. I want it a little bit softer than that. So let me just cover that area first. You can also just, so if you don't want to use a needle eraser, so I just want you to look up quickly. You'll see this section that I've done here now. So it's all the same sort of tonality, all right. If you don't want to use a needle wool eraser there, you can actually also use an earbud, a cotton bud, you know, to take off some of the charcoal. You can see that it actually works quite nicely, as long as it's a clean one. Can you see that it actually takes a fair amount? So you can get that soft sort of transition without using an eraser. And you can actually see how nicely that actually works to bring in some of the sort of lighter grayer areas instead of using the needle wool eraser. You can use the needle wool eraser as well, but I find that this actually works a little better. If you don't have an earbud, then you can also just use the tip of your tissue. You can just make like almost like a blending stump type of thing, okay, but the blending stump won't really work. It doesn't take off quite enough, and you can see that also takes off a fair amount. And then you've also got like a bit of a tip to work with too. So you can use that as well, okay, to take off some of the whiter areas. Okay, so that's how I'm going to change those very subtle tonalities over here. Remember, just to keep your eyes squinted, making sure you're not going too light in that area. Because, you know, when you're comparing that light against the dark in there, it looks like it's white. But if you compare it against the white itself, then it's actually not that white. Okay, so that's where it can be quite tricky sometimes. Some really nice, you can see now I'm just playing around with the needle wool eraser now, just getting in the slightly lighter areas that I want. Just bring in some extra textures. So you'll see what I'll do is I keep on cleaning it, because, you know, as soon as you bring it into the charcoal, it gets dirty, and then when you put it back down again, nothing actually happens. Okay, so I do clean it every now and again. Just squeeze it and clean it, you know. And then I'll go back into this, and then I'll put in some more darks where I want little dark pieces to be. Some little extra bits. And you can also go over the charcoal pencil with willow charcoal too, as well. So. And now I'm using my blending stump just to blend certain areas together that I want to blend. So where these very black lines that I brought in with the charcoal pencil, I don't want to be quite so rough. You know, I want the texture sort of to stick more with the top section of the boat. And I just want to blend these in a little bit more. But you can leave them rough as well. You don't have to blend them in. I just want myself, for my own personal thing, I want this to be a little bit more blended. I'm just as bad with my drawing tools as I am with my paintbrushes. I end up with 4 drawing tools in my hand at the same time, but it can be a bit messy sometimes. Yeah, so you can play around and you can add what you want in, you know, so you can look at the picture, use it as a reference, but then if there's something else that you really like, then you can bring that in yourself. You know, if, say you make a mark and you think, oh, that actually looks so cool, I'm going to try that somewhere else in the picture, then you can do that too. So don't be a slave to your picture. Use it as a reference. So I would suggest, you know, this area that goes against the sky, that I would actually suggest you actually do with the blending stump itself, okay, to get that edge, alright, because you're not going to be able to do that with your, with the charcoal itself. It's going to be a bit awkward and it's going to make a mess. So just to use that. So I'm not going to go too detailed with everything at the moment. If I want to, then later on, if I feel that it needs a little bit of fine tuning, then I'll do it at the end. You know, I'm just a bit wary to bring in too much detail initially, because, you know, sometimes you can just overwork it completely and then realize you actually didn't need to put all of that work in there. So as long as my tonality is correct, I'm going to make sure I get those all right. And then we can do the background. The background, we're going to be working mostly with the paintbrush to get that down. So a lot of paintbrush work in that. You'll see there is a white strip which shines up against that sky there over there on the front of the boat itself. Okay, so if you want to bring that in, you can. It's really not a train smash if you don't want to bring it in. But if you are going to bring it in, I would suggest then that you make the sky a little bit darker just behind there, so that when you put that light in, not quite that dark, but yeah, just so that it's a fraction darker. Just be very careful that you don't make it too dark like I've just done. I got a bit enthusiastic there, so I'm just going to rub that out of it. There we go. Just using my little ball here. So just be very careful when you put that on there. There we go. Just want it a fraction darker there, so that when I use the hard eraser to bring in that light white line, it shines up nicely, a bit like what we did over there with the other part of the boat. And I'm just going to use the hard eraser very carefully to bring that down. So there, you have to have quite a steady hand for this. because you basically just want to make one line and get it done. So that works. It's very subtle. It's very, very subtle. It's not really in your face there at all. And then I'm just going to add a little bit of one or two of those little dots that are in there, just so you can sort of see that there is something there. It's not just a white line. It does give it some sort of body there. So that actually works very well for me. Just going to finish off this little piece here, and then I'm going to show you how to do the background, because I know some of you have to leave a little bit earlier usually, so I will get back into that, because this you can always fine tune afterwards, you know. So I'll go back into this later and bring in maybe some of the darker areas, some extra sort of cracks, etc., that I see in the wood. So especially with this little piece in the foreground over here, this front section of the boat, I would like to bring in a little bit more detail. So, but I want to start getting the background done. So those of you that do need to go a bit earlier, then you can. At least you know how to get the background in. Okay, so that looks good. Yeah, because I want to show you how to do the grassy part. So if you can just make sure that you've sort of got this bottom section of the boat in the meantime, even if you haven't finished the rest of it, that's also fine. Just so we can get into that, and I'm going to show you how to do that grass part. Alright, so I'm going to leave the rest of the boat for the moment. I'm not going to work in that. I'm going to work into that later. I'm going to get started with the background. Okay, alright. Okay, so you're going to have to watch what I'm doing over here. And then you're going to, you know, don't just listen to what I'm saying. You're going to have to actually watch what I'm doing. Okay, so this grassy part over here, it's not as complicated as it actually looks. What we're going to do there is we're going to take the willow charcoal on its own, okay, and you can make it quite smallish piece, just got a nice small piece to work. I don't want to work with the edge, I actually just want to work with the area. And I'm just going to draw in where the grass is, sort of like the shadowy part. All right, so when you're looking at the reference itself, where the grass sort of ends up to where the grass ends, I'm going to be basically just filling in that area, not pitch black like that over there. You can see just, you know, little broken bits in between. Don't stress too much about that. Okay, so I'm going to bring that in there up to where the grass goes there. So you can bring the grass all the way up to there if you want to, but there you can see the shadow sort of goes into ground, so we can actually just do that. It does sort of disappear, so don't stress too much about that you can't see what's going on there, because you actually can't see what's going on there. All right, so you just start off where the grass is. Okay, so get that shape right. So if I squint my eyes and I sort of look at that general sort of shape there, that's the shape I'm trying to get, the grassy bits, where the grassy bits are. Okay, so I'm going to bring that in like so, all the way up to where I see the grass. And you can change it slightly, even you don't have to be exactly the same, as long as you've got the same sort of idea. You can see I'm making it relatively dark, not pitch black, but relatively dark. Okay. Okay, like so. And then what you're going to do is you're going to use your hard eraser with a sharp point, And then you're going to scratch the grass into this. So remember, that grass isn't as white as the rest of the whites. Can you see that? If you actually squint your eyes, you can see it's not really that white. Okay, so you're going to do it relatively lightly in the beginning. Okay, because you don't want the whites white. You just want to get that impression. And what I'm doing is I'm going to do a bigger piece of paper for you just to show you what I'm doing here. I just don't want to. Okay, I'm just going to show you on a larger version. So what I've done is I've basically worked, because it's not the right paper, but you'll get the impression of what I'm going to do. Okay. Okay, so I basically put my charcoal down. And then what I'm going to be doing is I'm basically just going to be almost zigzagging that sort of impression, but now on a smaller scale. Can you see what I'm doing? I'm crisscrossing. Okay, I am going in the direction of grass. Okay, so I'm just basically scratching out the grass, leaving some dark areas in between, etc. So you can sort of see what I'm doing. All right, very rough. That's the impression that is going to give you that impression of that grass there, because that's all you really need. You don't need more than that. Okay, so, but I'm going to obviously work with smaller little marks in that. That's why I just wanted to show you how to do it, but using smaller marks. Okay, so just using the tip. You have to clean every now and again. Sometimes you have to actually go and use another sharper tip, or you have to cut another piece as well. But it does get quite full of charcoal because it's you know, you've put quite a bit of charcoal down there, so it's going to get dirty quite quickly. So what you can do is you can just sort of clean it with your fingers, and eventually you're going to see it doesn't want to get clean anymore, and you're not going to get a sharp point anymore. So then you just have to quickly cut another piece. Okay, so just sort of get the impression of the grass there. As long as you move in the same direction as the grass, that's also fine. And then what we'll do is, once we've got all the grass down, then we'll go back in with that charcoal pencil and we'll make some darker areas inside into that grass there. So you can understand why we didn't use a charcoal pencil initially to put the black down, because otherwise you're going to end up with this area that you can't erase because of the black. Okay, so let's just get this charcoal, get the grass in there. And remember, it mustn't go white because it's not white. It's sort of like a grey. Just little scratchy, squiggly marks. And you really don't need a lot, you know, you just need a few. But you just want to see, you know, drag the grass up into that black area so that you can see a few little grassy bits. And as I said, you can bring that grass all the way to the front here. So you can bring it all the way through to the front there if you feel like you want there to be something over there, okay, that it's not just a black spot. Okay. And that's actually all I'm actually going to do. I'm not going to do anything else. I'm just going to 1 or 2 little marks there. But that's it. That's all I'm doing. I'm not doing anything more. If you overwork this, it'll just be a mess. So that is all I'm going to do for the grass. I'm not going to do any more. And then I'm going to bring my charcoal pencil in to the areas that I want. A little bit darker, so sort of where the boat joins in with the grass now. Make that slightly darker. Again, I'm going to make sure that my pencil is sharp though. Okay, so it must have a sharp point. Otherwise, you're going to battle to get into that grass. And then you can bring 1 or 2 little dark patches into the grass as well. So if you want to make it slightly darker somewhere, you can. Okay, so there I am now. Just every now and again, just making 1 or 2 little patches a little bit darker with that pencil. And then what you can do is you can go back into that. If you find it's a little bit rough, then just use your blending stump to just smooth it out slightly if it's a little bit rough for your liking. But you can see now the grass stands out a little bit better against it because I've made it a fraction darker there. You can also use the willow charcoal as well if you want to make it slightly darker. But remember, the willow charcoal doesn't go that black. Look, it will go a little bit blacker when you spray it. Okay, so when you do put fixative on this, it is going to go a little bit blacker. Okay, there we go. So before you work on this background part, you must just erase any bits of charcoal that you've blown onto there, just to keep it nice and smooth, because remember, we've got quite a smooth surface to work with here. You know, it's not a rough surface, it's sand. There is some texture to it as well, but I want to make sure that this is relatively clean before I go into it. Alright, so there we've got the boat down. Okay, so with regards to the shadow of the boat, so you've noticed I didn't draw that shadow in. Yes, I know it is quite a distinctive shadow, but this you have to do freehand, because if I'd drawn the line in, you know, if I traced it in, or if I put a pencil in there, you're going to end up with this very, you know, like a sharp mark, okay, that you can't really soften. And I want the shadow to be, it's a very distinctive shadow, but it's a soft shadow. Okay, so it's not a hard shadow like these are all hard shadows. All right, so that's why I didn't bring it in with the pencil itself. Okay, but what you can do is you can actually sketch it in just with your willow charcoal now. So you can just grab a piece of willow charcoal and just sketch in that general sort of shape there. Just make sure it does follow the right shape. So even although you don't have anything to trace, so to speak, you can sort of judge, you know, look at an area, you know, if you're not used to freehand drawing. So what you can do is you can look at an area to start off that shadow. So if I look at the edge of this boat over here, actually let me rather show you on this. Okay, so if I look at the edge of the boat here, then I can see that's, if I had to draw a line there, I can see roughly that's where that little shadow starts. Okay, so that's how and then, you know, when I look from the side, I can sort of see it starts over there and about over there, and then I'll make a mark there, and I can see where it crosses, where it actually crosses over here. So that's what I'm trying to say, you know, you use what you have already as a reference to see where you would put in the beginning of that shadow. So I'm going to make a little point over there, because that's sort of the main section of where the shadow actually starts. And then I'm going to just sketch out that shadow very softly, because now I've got a shape to work with. And it doesn't matter if it's not absolutely exact. I mean, nobody's going to really notice, as long as it's not completely different, you know. Okay, so let's just get that shadow there. You don't even have to bring in that funny little white, you know, there is a white shadow there, but you can afterwards. You can always erase that in there. Okay, and then just judge roughly where it sort of ends. The grass you'll do in a very similar fashion to the other grass there. There you can see the shadow comes down, a dark shadow. Okay, so there I've got my shadow in. Remember, you can always erase afterwards. If you feel the shape's not quite right, then you can always erase afterwards. Okay. Then I'm going to use the charcoal dust to bring the shadow in. Okay, because remember, it is sand, it is nice and smooth, etc. So I'm going to rather use the charcoal dust with the brush, the paintbrush, to bring that shadow in. Okay, so grab some of your charcoal dust. I always find it's better to put the charcoal dust onto a page, you know, so don't, you can put it directly into the tub itself, but it tends to get almost like too much, all right? So, and remember, follow the same direction as your actual sand on the ground. Okay. And don't worry about that line over there. We'll get rid of it just now. Don't stress about that. As long as you only use the willow charcoal to do that, not something else. Because remember, this is also, again, all about those tonalities there. So you've got to get the tonalities right there. And this is where you can see whether or not you need to make sections of this grass a little bit darker. So where it joins up with the sand here, then you can go back into the grass a little bit and just make sure that it actually isn't just all smudged in, that you can actually get a bit of texture. But we'll do that afterwards. So those are all the little things that you do afterwards to fine tune. You know, if it bothers you. If it doesn't bother you, then you just leave it as it is. Okay, so we're going to get this shadow in nice. And remember, it has got a bit of texture, the sand, so the shadow doesn't have to be exactly the same sort of smoothness all the way through, you know, because we are trying to get that impression of the sand. Alternatively, you could also draw, you know, you could have drawn that shadow in with the paintbrush as well. You don't have to do it with the willow charcoal first. You could just go in with the paintbrush immediately and just draw in the shadow. So that was just to get the shape right. Okay, so remember to take it up all the way to where your grass starts. So be very, oh, goodness me. So be very careful when you do, you know, where you join this. So you can see there's almost like a halo over there. So be very careful about that. You need to almost tap your charcoal into that so that it all sort of blends into the grass. And then you'll just bring that grass back in there again. Okay. You just use a little bit of darkness because you could be, yeah, you've got to be very careful you don't get a weird halo there. Because then you're going to see that there's, yeah, something's not quite right. And then what I'll do is I'll just go back into that and bring in some of the darks a bit again there. So the shadows of the grass. And then where this dark shadow is now, you know, where I've got the lines left there from when I did the drawing, just take the needle with your razor and just go over that area so that you've got a nice soft transition between the shadow and the other area that you're going to be working in now. So get rid of those lines. So I have made it slightly different, but I'm just going to go back into that with the paintbrush again. Okay, so I've sort of gotten rid of most of those lines there. So now you can bring in those other little sharp shadows. I mean, if you want to, you can just use your needle wool eraser for that. Or you can use your hard eraser to bring in those little extra white lines there. Okay, and then the rest of it you're going to again just use your dust there with your paintbrush, and now you're going to start bringing in some of the darker areas that you see and into that whiter area. So you want to keep this nice and soft, this edge over here where the two join. You can make it, you know, if you want to change that shape slightly, you can. You just bring in your charcoal dust again, make it a little bit darker, you know, maybe get your shape right first. But now you'll see that will transition properly into the two now. So the two of them don't look like two separate shapes completely, or two different textures. You're trying to keep the texture the same, but the tonalities are different. Okay, so that's why we're just using the paintbrush for the moment to do all of this. And then the rest of your sand now you can do exactly the same thing. So where you want the darker areas, you can have the darker areas. So I'm just going to bring in the tonalities, and then what I'll do is then afterwards bring in some of the textures. So you can decide how high you want your background area to be. So I'm just going to have to keep on blowing here. Okay, so for instance, behind here we've got the bit of a hill. Okay, so you can see there I'm just slowly starting to bring in that very soft background behind it. You can see that's why I didn't want to bring in the pencil there or any drawing, because I want to make sure that that stays nice and soft. If you want to make it a slightly harder line, you can, and you just bring in, you just use your eraser to do that. Okay, so you don't have to make it as soft as I have. You can make it a little bit harsher. It's not a problem at all. And so you can give your hill more of a hill shape or whatever, or dune. But for me, the focal point is mostly about the boat over here. So I'm going to start bringing in those tonalities that I see there, and then I'll work into it and start bringing a little bit of the texture. Okay, so if you want to make this a little bit, you know, a slightly harder line, you want to give it more distinction, don't go in with a pencil or anything like that, or even your willow charcoal on its own. Rather take your blending stump and take some of the willow charcoal with your blending stump, because remember you've got a lot more control there. So your willow charcoal with the blending stump, and then you can bring in more of a line there. So actually I'm going to use a new blending stump. I see this one is a bit used there. So I always test for, oh there we go, that's better. Okay, so there I can now just get more of that transition, but it's not so hard. Can you see what I mean? So I don't want that hard line. There we go. And then if I want to make it even softer, then I can actually just go over it with the paintbrush and soften it really slightly if I want to. So it depends on what you're sort of looking for in that background. Okay. Sort of quite like these sort of trees in the background over here, because it does give it a little bit of sense of distance. So, and then bring in any other little textures that you want. Just use this blending stump to do that, okay? Because as I said, it is sand, so you want to sort of keep the soft textures there. But you can use the blending stump, and you can also use your needle eraser as well to bring in some textures. So, you know, there's a little bit of shadow there, sort of where the boat joins up there with the ground. You know, where it's sort of been pushed into the sand. You can see there, it was obviously initially pushed in there. And obviously where the wind blows or whatever, then it creates sort of like a bit of a hillock anyway. Yeah. You don't have to bring that in. You can make it just plain sand. It's also fine. And when I look at the reference itself, so the reference here is very light again, as I said. If I actually look at the the picture itself, it's quite dark in the foreground over here, which I quite like. So I think I'm going to make this a bit darker here. So I'm going to put on more charcoal. So as I said, it's actually a good idea to use a spoon or something if you're going to put this in here, but I'm just going to use my paintbrush. Don't try and drop it in like I did earlier on, where it just messed all over the place. So what I'm going to do here is similar to what I did to the grass, is make this quite dark at the bottom and then go into it with the eraser, and that will bring in a little bit of the texture of the sand there. Remember, your focal point is your boat, you know, so, but it doesn't mean that you must let the rest of it go. Okay, so, you know, if one gets tired or whatever with your drawing, don't rush it. You know, don't rush the background just so you can get the thing finished. Rather, have a break, you know, go back to it a day or two later, and then you know, finish it off nicely, you know. So because, you know, you can spoil your whole drawing. You know, you want to actually have a final nice sort of finished drawing. So never rush it, you know. Rather, if you feel tired, you stop and you just say, okay, I'm done now, I'm going to have a rest, because otherwise you end up just making rubbish, you know. You just end up rushing something, and then it's never quite right. And every time you look at that picture, you'll say, oh, you know, I shouldn't have actually brushed the background. I should have taken my time. Just as much thought should go into the background, even if it isn't as detailed as your actual picture. So that must gel with the rest. If you don't want to bring this grass in over here, you don't have to. You can also just make the sand, you know. So if you don't want to bring that grassy section in, you can leave it out completely. You can bring it in if you want to. Otherwise, you can just leave it out. That section as well, I won't make it as dark as that grassy section, because it's not as dark. So I'm going to use a similar principle as what I did with that grass over there. But when I initially put down my greys, I'm not going to make them so black, you know, obviously. Okay. So I think I'm going to make this a little bit darker here. So where it comes out from the hole, I'm going to make this section a little bit darker. I'm actually going to go into that with some willow charcoal. For me, it's not quite dark enough. I'll do that piece of charcoal now. Okay, so this section here, I'm actually definitely going to make it a bit darker. Just do yourself a favor, this whatever area you've been working on here with this charcoal dust, you know, because of all the blowing and everything, it goes into everything. So just be very careful when you do anything else afterwards, that you don't end up with charcoal dust on everything. Yeah, that's why I try and work on a cloth now. I was working on a piece of paper, but then I found charcoal dust was going everywhere, so the shadow there, a little bit darker as well. You can see how nice it is to play around with this paintbrush, you know, to get the right sort of transitions here, you know, nothing too hectic, nice and soft. So you can see that looks like sand now, it doesn't look like this rough sort of ground. In here now. I'm going to use a nice sharp bit of your eraser there. Just remember to cut again if you find it's not sharp enough. Just cut a new piece there. And always start off a bit softer, you know, initially. Don't go into it too hard. So here in between the grass now, so I sort of put in those little light areas that I wanted, just to get that impression of the grass, and now I'm just going to bring in those little shadows almost that the grass is creating. Because remember, your ship's creating a shadow, so therefore your grass is also creating a shadow. Okay. So don't forget that, you know, the shadows on the left-hand side of the grass. You know, if you've got a clump of grass, don't put the shadow on the right-hand side of the grass. If the, you know, the shadows must always go in the same direction. So, you know, especially if you're not really looking at the reference, just remember that. Keep that in mind, you know. Otherwise, it's going to look really strange if you have this weird sort of shadow going in the opposite direction to what it actually should be. What I do sometimes is I put the dark down, a little bit of dark down into this, and then I'll go back over it again with the eraser to sort of get a more subtle effect. Oh, that's actually working well. All right, so if you want to bring a little bit of grass, you know, into any other areas as well, you can do that. You don't have to stick to the picture, as I said. You know, so if you feel like it needs a little bit more texture some way or other, then just put it in. And then for this section over here with the sand, you can leave it just like this, you know, just have it sort of darkish, plain, ordinary sand. Or you can have, if you want some of the texture that you see in the sand here, you can do that as well. But then you must just use a kneadable eraser to do that. Okay, so what I would suggest you do there is just basically almost scribble on top of it, but very lightly. Okay, so you can scribble onto your charcoal dust there. Just get some sort of texture going. So I'm not using any specific mark. I'm literally just scribbling to get some sort of texture going in there. So you can see it gives quite a nice sort of texture there. And what we'll do into that then is bring in some darker areas with a little bit of the charcoal, the willow charcoal itself. So just using the tip of this eraser, I'm trying to keep it sort of relatively soft so that I'm not losing the sandy effect, but just using that. There we go, slowly but surely, just a little bit of texture into that. So it doesn't look like it's just this flat sand, but you can also leave it flat. You really don't have to do this at all. I'm just trying to sort of bring in those little highlights you could almost see there. Little bumps of light as it catches the rough sand, you know. But because I'm using this soft eraser, it's keeping those marks relatively soft. If I use the hard eraser, it really wouldn't work. It would look awful. It would be way too hard. Remember to cleanse every now and again, so won't, otherwise it will stop erasing. But very gently, I'm hardly even touching the paper. I'm just sort of squinting my eyes and getting a little bit of that texture there, very softly. That actually is working very well. I may actually just leave it like that. Sometimes if it just works, and don't go and overwork it, you know. Don't go and put in the lighter areas if you don't feel it's necessary. Sorry, not the lighter. You don't have to put the darker areas. If you feel it actually works well, then you can just leave it as it is. Now there's two ways you can go with charcoal. You can either bring in a lot of detail or you can leave it a little bit less detailed. I'm just going to bring in a bit of texture with my blending stump there. One or two little bits of texture into there. I don't like things that are too sort of flat, you know, so use your imagination as well. You don't have to follow it directly. So I want to bring in some darker patches I can here. Just be very careful though, just don't overwork it. Because remember, this is quite sort of late afternoon, you know, so you can see by the length of the shadow that the boat is casting, that whatever else has got height to it is going to create a shadow. Does that make sense? All right, so what I mean is if there's a bump in the sand, it is going to create a shadow. So sort of like the bumps in the sand over there, you know, like a dent in the sand over there, you can see it is creating a shadow. All right, so that's what I mean by if you are going to put a stone or something, you know, that's not in the picture, just remember that then that stone also needs to have a shadow as well. All right, so you can't just put a stone in and it's going to look very strange if it doesn't have a shadow. so I'm just going to bring in a few of those little, I do quite like these slight marks in, also because we've got texture here and we've got texture there, and then it almost looks like weird if I don't have a little bit of texture in the foreground as well. It just looks a little bit bare, so I'm just going to rather bring in one or two little dark bits here, but then just soften them again slightly. But one can actually have so much fun with this foreground, just bringing in some textures, and that's why I don't want it to be too plain, because it's going to look very strange, just having all this texture and then no texture. So, I'd rather spend a bit of time and sort of bring in a little bit more there. Well, not more, but just enough to sort of make it work. I think it's very important to do that. So. Even those little bits of grass at the back of the ship over there, there's one or two pieces of grass sticking out behind there, or a bush or something. It just sort of makes it Okay, I just want to put this up quickly and just look at it from a distance. You can see actually where the charcoal, you know, we're now actually blended it a bit here. So the charcoal pencil's got this brownness to it. So I can actually see the brownness coming out over here. So one's going to be very careful when you blend it because it's not the same color as your willow charcoal. You know, willow charcoal is literally black and white. And for some odd reason, whenever I do this, you know, when I start blending the charcoal pencil in, then I get this weird sort of like sepia sort of color to it, you know, which is a bit irritating. Okay, I think I'm almost done. Okay, so after standing up and looking at it, I'm actually quite happy with the way it looks. There may be one or two little things that I want to change. Okay, you see, and I've already seen what I want to change. So I'm going to quickly just go into that. So often when you stand, you'll see something that bothers you, you know, and then that's what you'll quickly go and change. So the writing could probably be a little bit darker on there as well. So I think let's just do that now quickly. So it really does help to take a break from it for a little bit, even if it's just 5 minutes. But then you just suddenly see what it is that you missed before, because you're so busy in the picture, you know, you get so involved in the small little details that you're working with, or that area that you're working in, that you actually sort of lose the plot a little bit in a way. And you don't see the picture as a whole. So I'm going to quickly just put the writing here a little bit fraction darker in one or two places. So remember, we're trying to still keep it old, but you know, and rustic. I think that'll actually be fine. And then maybe just the grass a little bit here, one or two bits here. Very nice. I just want to bring in a few little extra pieces here. So yeah, I think I'm going to leave it for the moment. So when I've decided that it's finished and I've tweaked it where I want to tweak it, then I will post it at the end of the video. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this lesson as much as I did. Until next time, cheers.